So I'm here to present the catalogue of the Fitzwilliam Museum, and it is my special pleasure to introduce another colleague of our Cambridge team, and this is Dr. Melanie Gibson, and she will be speaking about the ceramics from Samarkand in the collection of the Fitzwilliam Museum. The Fitzwilliam Museum is the main museum of Cambridge and is a part of the university. And it was founded mainly due to the efforts of Richard Fitzwilliam of Marion, who is in the beginning of the 19th century, gave all his collections to the university. And nowadays it possesses important artifacts from all over the world, including Italian Renaissance, French Baroque, Egyptian Classical, and of course the British art. What is so peculiar, what is so special about the Fitzwilliam is that its main building still keeps the original atmosphere of the old-fashioned European museums, the first European museums, when the visitors were mainly gentlemen collectors, who in their manor houses would have artifact collections no less important in artistic value than what they would see in the museums open for the wider public. So that is why it has a very special atmosphere, very special feel, where you can walk around the museum, see the nice furniture, soft carpets, and generally have this design of the rooms combined with a typically eclectic and opulent Victorian splendor. However, compared with the paintings by Titian and the engravings by Rembrandt, apart from the Islamic ceramics, catalogued by Rebecca Bridgman not very long time ago, Islamic art has never been on the permanent open display in the museum. And this is why it is so important, this project founded by Mr. Firdaus, that it encourages even local scholars to pay more attention to the hidden treasures, even in the well-known collections. The Fitzwilliam Central Asian collections are very diverse, and we can really witness the cultural dialogue between East and West, and particularly the exchange of ideas along the famous Silk Road. And I'm showing you now the Bactrian camel motif in the Tang Dynasty sculpture and European Baroque art. We can also trace the development of the bird motif, and I'm sure Melanie is going to speak about this in more detail. And this is the evolution of the 14th century Chinese vase to the Samarkand bottle of the 15th century, and to William de Morgan's last experiments of the 19th century in England. The art of Maveran Nahr in the Fitzwilliam Museum is presented in several chapters, and I'll briefly introduce. Apart from the ceramics, which Melanie is going to speak about, we're having a section on numismatics written by Dr. Adrian Popescu, and he's the head of the coin and medals department at the Fitzwilliam Museum. Unfortunately, he can't come. He couldn't come, but the chapter is exceptionally informative and really beautifully written. I'm sure you know, those who know something about numismatics, that the Fitzwilliam collection is one of the most representative in Britain. We have objects from the Kushan, from Bactrian and Sogdian kingships, to Hiva and Kara Emirates. So Ganhara sculpture and Hellenistic jewelry was presented by K. Rajang of Oxford Centre of Classical Art. So these exquisite pieces were acquired by the Fitzwilliam Museum in the early 1930s during the Hermitage sales of post-revolutionary period, and they used to belong to Alexander Neredov, who was the Russian ambassador to Constantinople. And they still have quite a lot of things in the Hermitage from this collection. A chapter on Bukhara embroidery, mainly from Bukhara, was contributed by Miragul of Tashkent Institute of Art. And the extremely interesting piece of male garment probably was specially commissioned by its previous owner, Baron de Minas of Alexandria, who passed the piece to the museum on the recommendation of Professor Alan Weiss, who served in the British intelligence during the Second World War in Egypt. And we have also a very informative and amusing welcome from the current director of the Fitzwilliam Museum, Luke Sison, who arrived to the museum quite recently from the Metropolitan Museum. And you can see the team of our contributors, apart from the authors of the introductory remarks. by Feruza and Edward Tveladze. So the book consists of the introduction, actually 3, by the director, by myself, and by the founders of the project. And then my chapter was on Central Asian folk art. And that was mainly the miniature painting, and they were coming from album folia, from albums or manuscripts. And in some cases, it was possible even to give a more precise attribution. For example, like in this case, we have a similar piece in the Metropolitan Museum. So it's typically Bukhara miniature of use of landing in Egypt, and using the comparison of the more well-known piece, it was possible to attribute more precisely, chronologically and territorially. On the rather enigmatic image, this one, able to identify or attribute the subject as probably Alexander trying to solve the riddle of the magic bowl of Jamshid, and using the similar British Library painting. Of course, we can see the famous Sultan Hussein Bukhara surrounded by his sages. So the main focus of my chapter is given to the reconstruction of the so-called Fitzwilliam album, and which arrived to Cambridge as a bequest of Percival Manouk, who finished his career in Patna as a supreme judge. After the death of Manouk in 1946, his collection arrived to the British Museum, where it was split into 4 pits. And one went to the British Museum, one to the Victoria and Albert, one to the Fitzwilliam Museum, and one to Bristol. But the rest was sold at various auctions. And so this created the job for me, as I'm now trying to chase what might have been parts of the original album, and which belonged to Manouk. And by grouping already identified paintings and pieces of calligraphy, I came to the conclusion that the album was commissioned by probably Hamida Banu Begum, the mother of Emperor Akbar, who became the emperor only at the age of 13. He was a very young boy. And of course, you know, he was the grandson of Babur. The main purpose was most likely to remind him about her status and role at his court, as during almost all her life she really had to compete with other ladies in the harem for the attention of her own son. And before it was the chief wife of Humayun, Biga Begum, and later she lost her own children, and so she actually appropriated Akbar right from his birth, which was quite a tragic thing. And then it was his wet nurse, who apparently Mahan Anga, she became more or less de facto the regent of the empire. And I suggest several pairs which would prove my argument. This tradition of using the images from flora and fauna, the local nature, it started by Babur. The fashion was really introduced by him. But here we have the allegorical portraits of the mother and son, and the sort of a filial love and maternal love to each other. And so several folia which are now in the Louvre are probably missing in the Fitzwilliam Museum, because it's not only what the year when they acquired this in Paris, these bits and pieces, but also the paradigm, the technique, and the palette, which were also very typically for the Central Asian style, and which are now in the Louvre Morocco. And this bit, which is now in the Tehran, which would be probably also something which could be part of the original album. And I'll probably finish my presentation with this portrait of possibly Shaybani Khan. We have, it's now in the British Museum. Very tempting to compare it with another portrait of this very heroic character in the history of Central Asia. And of course, this is a very famous portrait from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, And we have this later inscription saying that it was produced by Behzad. But in the British Museum, we have the inscription saying that this is Tatar Khan Podshahi Dasht-e Qipchak. So we have the king of the Qipchak steppes, and this is the title which actually Shaybani Khan was trying to obtain for probably about 30 years. And in the very end, I would like to thank my Cambridge colleagues for being so helpful and throughout the whole process, especially Linda Clark, Helen Ritchie from the Applied Art Department, and Nick Zolman. Yes, this is the jewelry part. And of course, my special thanks go to the Tashkent team, especially Katerina Soboleva, and of course, Firdaus Abdulkhaliqov, without whose constant support and initiative, this book would have never been published. Thank you very much.